Hey, everybody. Welcome back to this thing we're doing, these successive days of streaming on Facebook and on YouTube. I hope that you are at one of those two things watching us here. And if not, if you're going to be watching the recording someday in the future, well, welcome to the recording. Those of you who are on Facebook or YouTube, you can put comments in the comment section, and theoretically, I'll see them here and be able to respond to them. That's the way it works most of the time. I was told yesterday a few people had trouble getting into that room or whatever that it does, so I apologize for that. Hopefully it's better today. So yeah, this is a 5-day thing. We've been doing this the 5th day, the last day, and it's a little confusing for some people because I say this is day 4 of our streams, and that's true because we were in the middle. We stuck in that webinar, which was different. It was broadcast in a different way, but it was the 3rd day of our 5, and so it was probably should have been listed as day 3, and that would have been yesterday was day 4, and this is day 5. But I didn't count it that way. I counted that as a separate entity. So this is the 4th day of those extra ones, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Today's going to be about Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis. So whatever number it is, it's about Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis, and that's what was always in the plan. So hopefully you're here to hear about that, because we're here doing essential coaching skills here at the Essential Coaching Skills platform, and we teach classes. I teach classes in 3 things: sleight of mouth, NLP, and what I consider to be essential NLP skills. There's a lot of NLP skills, a lot of recipes to put together different processes in NLP. So lots of things you can learn. I've narrowed it down to what I think to be truly essential for being a good coach. And then there's also this Ericksonian hypnosis, or what I call Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis, for a variety of reasons that hopefully will be clear to you if they're not already before this day is done. As in other of the live events, I have a guest visitor here today, and I'm very excited to have Nona. Nona. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I just messed up her first name, but she'll say it for you, and will hopefully do a much better job of not only pronouncing her name, but also explaining to you a bit who she is. She was a student of mine here at these Essential Coaching Skills classes, and she was great at many things. She's a great person and really smart and capable, but she's also a really good hypnotist, and was one before I met her. So she just is here because I want to find out, like, why did she need to bother to take my classes, and why is Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis useful for her when she was also already very successful as a hypnotherapist, and also, does she use it in coaching? How else does she use what she learned in this stuff? So that's why she is here, and I'm looking forward to talking with her, to catching up with her after a few years of not seeing her. It was a couple of years ago when she was in the classes. As you know, this is a sort of advertising thing we're doing to try to let you know about the stuff that's coming up. The classes begin on April 1st. We have 3 days a week, 3 classes, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday. Tuesday is sleight of mouth, Wednesday is NLP, and Thursday is hypnosis. We also have an office hour later in the day on Thursday for people could just show up and ask questions about any of the 3 things, or anything else too. If they want fashion tips, I'm really good at that. Really good at fashion tips. I was almost thinking of just going into that, just being like, Doug's fashion tips. Doug I on the fashion guy, or something like that. No, I jest. I'm crappy at that, but nevertheless, you can ask me questions about anything at all on Thursday afternoons if you're in the thing. So I think that's all for today for all my introduction here. So I'm going to bring in Nona so you can meet her. She's a fascinating person, and I think you'll agree it was a good choice to bring her here. So with no further ado, Nona, I'm going to ask you to come in from the sidelines and join us on stage here. Hey.
Hi,
there.
Doug. Hello, Doug. So good to see you again after all this time.
All this time. Yeah, I know. And you are in a new office, so it's a new background. I don't recognize where you are.
I'm so fresh in my new office that I'm not in it yet. So this is my home office. I had to meet you from here. No, I just moved my office from Newport to Newport. So it was just a lateral move.
All right.
So
Newport, Rhode Island.
Newport, Rhode Island. I'm Newport Hypnosis.
You are Newport Hypnosis.
Yes.
Yes.
That's it.
Cool.
I am.
How close are you to the water?
Well, everything in Newport's pretty close to the water. We're a little
Yeah.
peninsula island.
Yeah.
So anywhere in town is really close to the water.
Okay.
So quarter mile, half mile.
That wasn't any part of the reason for moving.
I moved for love. So, but yeah, I love it here. It's a fabulous place to live. There's so much going on.
So your last name, it starts with, it's got more vowels, no consonants than most names do. That
It's impossible to say with an American accent. It's Zanika. So it's a Croatian name, but it's impossible to say unless you are born in Croatia. And I won't say it.
And you weren't born in Croatia. So
No, I
Zanika
wasn't.
is kind of an American way of saying the name.
Yes.
All right. Okay, good. Zanika. Newport Hypnosis. Got it. Cool. So am I right? You were a hypnotist long before you met me, right?
I was. And I just want to say, it's been a couple of years. I can't believe it. But what I learned from you really validated a lot of the things I felt, but also brought my whole practice to a different level. It made it be more real, more authentic, and allowed me to do so much more with each client. And that's really what has changed my business since all those hours and hours, a couple of years, 2.5 years, I think. And but the vast knowledge that you added into what we got out of it. Because the old way of doing hypnosis, which is good, and a lot of people still use it, was you induce the person into the trance, and then you add some suggestions after you speak to them a little bit. But Neo-Ericksonian takes that to a completely different level, and quite frankly, it felt more natural to me. And Doug, you allowed me to kind of express what I was feeling and how I felt it should go anyway. And I was able, during that time with you in the classes, to really style that and feel confident in that.
Cool. I'm glad to hear that. That's thank you. We should just do this more often. I want to get compliments. That's great. No, seriously, that's why I teach the way that I teach, because I don't want people to have a methodology that's, the O'Brien style or whatever. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Hypnosis, NLP, I mean, it's all communication. It's interpersonal relationships. It's you, me talking, you talking with your client, having that connection, that community, that connection with your client, that in hypnosis can be very profound. You get into that sort of shared, trance state together. And it's, if you're not just being your authentic self, then it's just not going to work as well.
Exactly. And it allows us to, because a lot of people do come in and they're uncomfortable. Sometimes we don't hear about what they're really there for until the second or third session, as you know, and it helps them feel comfortable because I'm really just talking to them. And,
Right.
and I'll be honest, anybody has a session with me, I really don't do a formal induction anymore, because I begin with the speaking, the conversational type of Ericksonian. And one thing I want to say as we talk here is that, your vast knowledge of NLP and other techniques I can feel the depth in that the more I do it, because I studied NLP a long time ago too. And I studied hypnosis and I studied a lot of different techniques. What was so valuable about you, Doug, is that you gave us a foundation, you gave us a formula to put them all together meaningfully, because you can't just go jumping in on somebody and give them metaphors. It has to be a story. And that, I feel, helps my clients understand it more. So if
Yeah.
I just, and sometimes, and we all know the stories of the people that like, well, what happened? Nothing happened. And then, they do quit smoking or whatever, but
Right.
also they feel like, well, maybe I just was ready to quit smoking. And then sometimes that can make them feel like, well, why did I need a hypnotist? But also it can, they don't feel the empowerment from it.
All right.
So in the conversational style, yes, we're using their language and their words back to them, but we kind of put it into a story and have more of a conversation. And for me, anyway, I feel like the more they know about the process, the more valuable it is to them, the more they really understand what's happening and
Mhm.
why, and they get a better and longer results, So that's what I feel like you gave us with all of your knowledge and so many things. You wove it together so we can use it in that, that fluid way.
Yeah. I'm just looking, thank you for that. I was distracted a little bit because I haven't seen any comments coming in. And I noticed that the comment section, one of them said that it looked like our stream was deleted on Facebook to try creating a new stream. So I'm attempting to do that now. I don't know what's going on here. Seems to be working on Facebook. I mean, sorry, on YouTube. We are live on YouTube. Nobody's made any comments, but that's all so interesting. I don't know why it's not going live on Facebook, but it's not. So say la vie. Sorry, folks, those of you who can't hear me because you're not. I'm apologizing to you specifically. Not that that matters. Okay, anyway, so yeah, getting back to what you were saying. It is that sort of thing that is so important. And it's curious that, here's a story for you. When I was working at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital for pre-surgical hypnosis, I was working with Dr. Oz back in the day. There was a thing we were working on that was testing whether hypnosis worked in a clinical, medical setting.
Mm-hmm.
And how could we test that if we wanted to, do a sort of double blind thing? Like, what would be the fake hypnosis? How would you do a placebo hypnosis where it isn't hypnosis? And we just found that was almost impossible to do, because if you're just talking with the person, but you're not giving hypnotic suggestions, but we're always giving hypnotic suggestions. It's like almost impossible not to do hypnosis if you're just talking with somebody in a relaxed, comfortable conversation, and if you start telling stories, let's go, oh, you're doing hypnosis. Or if you start, saying anything nice to them at all, it's like, oh, you're doing hypnosis. But it was also interesting that for hypnosis to work, it seemed like they needed to know that they got the pill, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
The analogy was like if you were doing a placebo test with somebody, and in the middle of the night while they were sleeping, you snuck in and you put a placebo into their IV unit that was dripping into their veins. And they had no clue that you gave them a placebo in the middle of the night. It wouldn't work. They need to know that they got the pill, right? So it's also true with conversational hypnosis. You and I have both been in this situation where we've been doing this sort of conversational thing, not doing a formal trance, just telling stories and, slowing the voice down and doing the embedded commands thing. And it's worked. And then the patient goes, or the client basically says, like, I quit on my own. I had a client once who wouldn't give me a testimonial after she'd lost like 35 pounds. Because I said, well, you don't have to use your real name. It's okay. Just use your initials. She said, no, it's not that. It's just that it didn't work. I'm like, what? What didn't work? She said, yeah, the hypnosis didn't work. I did this all on my own. And I'm like, okay. And then I was caught on the horns of a dilemma. Do I, bring to her conscious mind that had worked so effectively other than consciously? Do I point that out consciously or not? And I figured, well, she'd paid me. Whether it was I got a testimonial or not wasn't important, really, ultimately. So I just said, yeah, that's right. You did do it all on your own, and you can keep doing it, can't you? Because you've learned how to do that for yourself, and you can keep those changes that you've earned now, haven't you? So that was kind of fun. But yeah, it's a funny thing. They have to know that they got the pill. So how do you do that? How do you draw the kind of line or whatever so that they know that you're doing your job, doing hypnosis?
Well, to clarify, I don't do a formal induction as taught by, NGH and other
Uh,
formal, certifying boards. I think that what I meant was when you sort of get them in slow way with the Ericksonian, you're talking already, so you're repeating back to them what we're going to do, kind
mhm.
of like a story.
Yeah,
Here's what we're going to do.
yeah, it is.
I'm going to tell you how to do it, and then
Story.
say this is what you did. So I start with that, repeating back to them. It is an induction because if you listen to anybody, Dronan, who didn't go to sleep in fourth grade, right?
Right, yeah,
So it really is an induction. I really meant the classical kind of view,
yeah,
10, 5, 4,
right.
So one thing I did, add into the end was I wrap it up in a certain way that then I can bring them out. And then I've heard back, from many clients, I didn't think I was hypnotized, and then all of a sudden I wasn't. And I do that for that reason. So they realize, wow, I've done something. And I want them to have that sense of empowerment. I want them to have that sense of accomplishment, that value that they can do this themselves.
Mhm.
So, but it does kind of delineate that to
Yeah,
answer your question that, oh, I was hypnotized. So I bring them up. The going into it isn't,
yeah,
traditional,
right, right, right. No, I get it. I get it. Yeah, so that's beautiful. That's really nice. So do you think that you've I don't know, the way that we present it with the online, because you were one of the first classes that I did really online. I had intended to do that before COVID. I had
hmm
set up my office in Manhattan to, have soundproofing and lighting, and it was all ready to go. And then boom, COVID hit. And so I just abandoned ship as did everybody else in that office and came up to my little country house here in upstate New York and started doing what I had planned to do with all this elaborate setup just on my kitchen table with my laptop. And I don't know if you were in the first class, or I don't think you were, but you were early on. And so you're one of the first people that really went through a kind of long class, like four
hmm
months or 6 months or whatever it was back then. How do you think that is useful or valuable, if it is? I'm assuming that it is, but I mean, how did you find it?
Well, I'm going to give you a glowing endorsement, of course, but it really was valuable because I've taken so many classes in different things,
Mhm.
over the years. But the access, I know we all went to Zoom and then we all went off, but it really was valuable because we could create that little community like we did, and we
Mhm.
had more access to you. We could go back and watch it. When you go to a training, unless it's down the street from you and you go to class, it gave me the clarity of being able to, be in person, but also, write my notes, understand, a little bit more, ask you questions. It was more formal because we're not in person, but it was less formal because we could ask you. It was,
Mm.
um, for me, it was invaluable, to be able to just pop open my computer and there we are that day. Go back and listen if I like. But also, there were a few other benefits to being able to have the little community, to have access to other tools. You'd send us things. You made yourself available to us for questions and answers. We had each other to, communicate with.
Yeah.
That's not possible in person. It's wonderful to be in person, but that isn't possible. We got to, even saving the comments and things,
Mm.
clarifying. I'm not the only one that didn't get this because you can't do that in a classroom, or
Right.
so
Passing notes on the down the road.
I got
Right.
kicked out of 7th grade for that, but yeah, exactly.
Did you really? Did you get in trouble?
I did, yeah.
Not kicked out though.
Not kicked out. I dragged out of class though. She put my desk in the hall for sure.
Oh, no way. Seriously?
Seriously.
Wow.
sure you're not totally
Just
surprised, Doug.
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. Wow, good. That's good educating pedagogy right there. Put this child's desk
Just
in this.
don't tell anybody.
Yeah, so that's neat though, because we do. I think it is a community that takes
Mhm.
place, that people get into, and I've been really impressed at how many sort of just separate practice groups have sprung up over the months and years that we've been doing this. People say, hey, why don't we get together on Monday mornings and practice together? And I mean, people can, because it's Zoom, right? You go anywhere. It's amazing.
I benefited from a few people, most notably Heather Lacados. We still
Yeah.
see each other. We still Zoom every week
Oh, wow.
at time and practice. I don't think I'd be where I am right now if it hadn't been for her, continued collaboration. So
Nice.
she's been very valuable to me. We learned together, and we explored, and we, based on what we learned together with you, Doug, then we could take it and, go to that next level, exploring and understanding even deeper, because we had that shared experience, but yet we
Right.
could take it further, like a lot of other people have done, little groups, and,
Mhm.
which is wonderful.
Yeah, it is wonderful. It is
Great
wonderful.
resource.
And I think, going into the reason I call it Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis for a minute. When I was a student of music back in the day, Erickson was still alive, but I'd never heard of him. I didn't hear of him until like years after I graduated from college, moved to New York City, was playing in rock and roll bands, took a NLP seminar from Tony Robbins, and started hearing that name. It's like anybody who is really good, I mean, like really good at NLP, could even do Ericksonian hypnosis. That's how good they were. And I'm going like, what is that? What is Ericksonian hypnosis? I mean, heard the name. I'd heard stories about how, like, Tony used to tell the story about how this person came in to see Erickson to quit smoking. And he said his account of it was, I went in and I was sitting there with this man who just kept, sitting there in his wheelchair with a purple suit on. And he just told these weird stories. I have no idea what he was talking about. And I got so bored, I think I even fell asleep. So I was just a complete waste of time. But I was kind of surprised the next day when I just didn't have any urge to smoke anymore.
That's the one.
And I started thinking about, I wonder if that Milton Erickson guy had anything to do with that, And so, it's fascinating. And it caught my mind, it caught my attention. I said, I want to learn that stuff. And then Dave, when I went to my first NLP certification course with Tony Robbins, and Tony brought in different people. He brought in Richard Bandler, he brought in, Robert Dilts and various other people. He brought in this guy, Dave Dobson, who got up on stage and started, telling weird, wacky stories. And he was so different from Tony. Tony was like, yeah, big, peak states guy, and Dave was like, I don't think he was actually smoking on stage, but it feels like he was. It feels like he was just like walking around on stage, just kind of telling these stories. And he had this voice that sounded like he'd been drinking whiskey a lot for many years, this kind of voice, smoking. And I was very surprised that so many of my colleagues, the students in the NLP classroom there, were falling asleep. It's like, come on, don't be so rude. But then I realized, oh shit, he's doing that Ericksonian stuff. Yeah, oh well. So and of course, when I went to study with Dave, because I had to, I felt like I had to, he made it very clear that he had never, this was not Ericksonian hypnosis that he was doing. He was doing what he called OTCC, or other than conscious communication. And it was not, he said, Ericksonian hypnosis. He said, I met Erickson once, but I developed what I do separately, independently, and perhaps a somewhat parallel fashion, but it's my stuff, not Ericksonian. So I studied with Dave like five of those fun shops. I went to 5 as what was known as a repeat offender with Dave. So First time, it was like 2 weeks. I think I was in trance the whole time. I didn't remember very much of it. Glad I took notes, but I didn't remember much. So I went back a second time in order to like have a little bit more conscious awareness of what I had learned. And that's kind of sort of when I decided that it's important to have both. You know, it's both.
It is.
It's important to have both a unconscious facility and competence, but it's also kind of good to know what it is that you know. And it sort of was the gestation for my teaching the way that I teach, because I want people to be good at it. And what's the reasons I do it over 4 months or 6 months or however long it is that you did it, I think, in 6, and we do it now in 4. It takes time.
It does.
Really get in there.
You can't really just do what we do by just taking a class. And that was the beauty of how you taught, Doug, because you have to realize it yourself before you can go and, perform this with someone else. It takes time to gather your stories and your metaphors and truly deeply understand. You can't just memorize the submodalities and then, repeat them back to somebody. You have to truly understand that and be able to put those into practice, put those into your stories, put those into your questions, because that's, such a huge part. Yeah.
It's funny because you're talking like this, demonstrating, whether you know it or not, why we do the essential coaching skills, because you're talking about beliefs, and from a sleight of mouth perspective, you're also talking about submodalities from the NLP's perspective, but you were talking about hypnosis. so you already blend them together, consciously or otherwise.
Well, that's what I think. There's some of us now I'll call it, nouveau hypnosis, that always wanted to do that. And it was kind of difficult because, you're supposed to do the induction and then go into this and that. And a lot of us just didn't. And what you did is you gave us the formula to blend that, to create, this different style that I feel is much more effective. And that's where you blend, the Ericksonian gives you that real foundation to weave all that in, to really blend it. I mean, it works by itself, but what is it by itself? You don't think he had a knowledge of all that?
Oh yeah.
You certainly do.
Yeah.
So that it's in there. And then it's so wonderful to be able to add in, your own little spice and stories and metaphors, because it is stories and metaphor. That's what Ericksonian is. However, they have to be,
However, they have to be what?
Oh, they have to be your own. You can't just read those and regurgitate them to someone else. And those have to come from what the client said to you. I remember I spent over a year or two, like, I'm going to have the best intake ever. And 8 pages. I scrapped it. It gave me a lot of insight, but I really just have a 1-pager now, because I had one client, and interestingly, she was very clever. She, on her 2nd or 3rd visit, she said, "You start hypnotizing me right when I walk in the door." Like, damn right. So even that question period at the beginning, which I consider the intake, when I'm asking them, trying to get them to tell a story, I want to get all their words. I'm writing it down furiously.
Oh yeah.
Because that's what they're going to hear subconsciously. And then if I can weave my stories around what they're doing and weave them into my metaphor, that's Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis via Doug O'Brien.
Okay. So, I'll take that. Accept that.
True.
It is. Well, in your case, for sure it is. I'd like to give homage to the people that I learned things from. And I will say that a lot of what I learned that you're describing there comes from Dave Dobson. In fairness, I never worked with Erickson. I never met Erickson. I met his wife. I met his daughter, spoke with his other daughter, Carol, but I've, never met him. And even if I had, he never certified anybody in hypnosis, or he never certified anybody in Ericksonian hypnosis. So it was kind of a question like, well, what is Ericksonian hypnosis? Because if you talk to Stephen Gilligan, it's this thing. If you talk to Jeffrey Zeig, it's this thing. If you talk to Bill Hanlon, it's this. It's like everybody had their own. Everybody who was there sort of took different things from it. Why? Because Erickson taught by telling stories. He didn't say, okay, first do this and then do this and then do this. He didn't do that. He just told stories. So people were left to interpret it their own way. But Dave, he had this this thing that he did that he called gold mining that I taught in class. And it's very interesting. I will go ahead and I will give away some free information here for the people who may or may not take the class. Gold mining is an incredibly simple process, but it is so rich, partially because of what you were just saying before. You get their own words, you get their own stuff, and you are able to give it back to them. But what you do with gold mining is you recognize that people have unconscious resources. They have resources that they're not conscious of, that they don't even perhaps recognize as resources. But so by asking certain questions very innocuously when they're first entering into your treatment with them, where they don't even know the treatment has begun, you're just asking questions like, "Hey, just by the way, you grew up in Buffalo, didn't you? Did you ever do that? I mean, what did you like to do as a kid? Like, what kind of hobbies did you have? What kind of games did you like to play?" And you just shoot the shit basically, about what did you like to do? What hobbies did you have? How did you spend your time, on Saturdays when you were 5 years old or 6 years old or whatever. And you find out all kinds of stuff from people that they love playing, with dolls. They love playing with puzzles. They love playing with models. They love playing, baseball. They love, they were one of the first roller bladers on their block, or whatever, all these kinds of things. It's fascinating stuff. And then you go like, oh, okay, that's cool. That's awesome. Oh, I suppose we should probably get started. So what are you here for? And then and you start talking about whatever the problem is and what their goal is for the session. Like, why are they here? What do they want? What's their outcome? Where are they heading towards? And what's stopping them from getting that? Right? So you find out what their goal is and what's the obstacle, what's stopping them from getting that. And then you sort of pause and muse to yourself, it seems to me that the solution to your problem is a lot like being a rollerblader, especially when you're the first kid on your block to do that. Because, as a rollerblader, and then you draw some parallels between what they did really well and loved and had in their bodies and their bones as a 6-year-old. You just draw the parallels to that thing that they're having trouble doing now, and they show them how
you anchor that to the success that they had before.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, I can do this. Their subconscious mind, which is that uncertainty part, says, oh my gosh, I can do this. It's it's fabulous.
Yeah. And that's what Dave Dobson refers to as a meta 5. It's because it takes one more level up than a metaphor, because it's based on their own stuff. You're not making up a story about a princess and a bicycle. This is them. This is their stuff. You're not making up anything. It's their stuff. They really actually resonate with it.
A lot of it can almost be surprising to us too. We all know the Milton Erickson story about the young little boy, heartbreaking that he was having trouble wetting the bed, and then he just wove that story. He was like, wait, stop, I got to watch that again. Where'd that come from? With baseball, it was brilliant.
Yeah.
And he just slipped it right in, and you could, you can't see the kid, but you just see this kid puffing up like, yeah, I did that.
You can imagine him doing that. Yeah. No, it is true. And so what Nona is referring to is a thing we cover in class that I learned from from Bill O'Hanlon, called the class of problems, class of solutions way of metaphors, which is very much aligned with Dave Dobson's gold mining and meta 5, but it's not necessarily. It can be, it isn't necessarily. But in this case, it certainly was. What what she's referring to is that this young boy came in for the problem of bedwetting. His parents considered him a bedwetter. So he was there to get fixed by the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And Erickson was a doctor. He was an MD and a PhD. No PhD, MD only. Anyway, after they got started, and Erickson learned that this kid played baseball, was really an avid baseball player, and his older, bigger brother played football. Bigger, more dominant sort of brother played football. Erickson said, "Okay, that's all I need to know." And he dismissed the parents, so they went off into the waiting room. And of course, he's a doctor, so it's okay. I don't necessarily recommend it these days, but back in 1950, it was okay for Erickson to dismiss the parents, let them go off into the waiting room while he had a chat with the little boy. And as soon as they were gone, they didn't mention bedwetting at all. They didn't talk about it once. All he talked about was baseball. For the rest of the hour, Erickson just talked about baseball. They discussed baseball, how great baseball is, and how what's great about baseball is it, especially compared to like football, nobody likes that. But what's great about baseball is it requires muscle control, fine muscle control, as opposed to those gross muscles that you use in football. But in baseball, you got to use fine muscle control because, like as an example, to catch the ball, you've got to position yourself at exactly the right time in order to catch the ball. And then you got to clamp down at just the right time to catch the ball. And likewise, to return the ball back to the infield, you've got to transfer the ball from the gloved hand to the throwing hand. That requires fine muscle control, which you have. And then to get it back to the infield, you've got to let go at exactly the right time to get the ball to go where you want it to go. And that constitutes success in baseball. He's just for an hour doing this kind of shit. And the kid was like, yeah, I do have fun. Yeah. So the class of problems, class of solutions thing was basically Erickson said, well, the problem, quote unquote, problem of bedwetting is a class of problems called lack of muscle control. So if you look at a class of problems, you can then find this class of solutions and say, what's a class of solutions? Like developing muscle control would be a class of solutions. So he was helping the kid to recognize that he could transfer the skill that he has, the Meta 5 or gold mined skill that Erickson discovered that the kid had, transfer that to this new situation and have the success that he wants in this. Brilliant stuff.
So effective.
I'm so glad you remembered that. That's great. Thank you for remembering that.
Of course I do. And there's many more stories that you gave us, and you taught us how they wove into, that effectiveness. Yeah. So why did that work? And that's really one of the treasures of that time. And to go back to what you just asked about, did you like learning on, through the computer? Because we can go back and say, hey, Doug, bring this up again, and have examples, breakout rooms where we could talk about it and, with other people. But yeah, and make them your own.
Right. And also, of course, especially by now, since we recorded everything that we did back in those days, and recorded everything since, the library is massive at this point.
Oh, yeah.
So there's lots of examples, people can see the demos that I do, because I always do demos with things when I'm, teaching them. So there's a person that volunteers, like it would look like we are right now, just the two of us doing a demo together, and the rest of the class is off watching. But you can watch those demos from 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, they're all there. So there's lots of references, lots of resources that are available to folks in the library. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, it is a great resource. And you don't have to leave home. It's from 1 o'clock to 2:30 every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And you don't have to leave home. You don't have to travel. You don't have to interrupt your schedule. And then when it's done, you're home already, or wherever, at your office, perhaps, etc. But yeah, it's good.
Part of the beauty too is if you do miss one, you can go look at it.
Right. We record it.
That's life. Right. Let's be honest. As much as we're dedicated, things happen, but it's always valuable to be able to have just the replays to see what we did in class again
Yeah.
before we come and, get
Yeah.
videoed making fools of ourselves.
Which is fun too. And
That's
also
fun.
caught on tape. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, it's true. Because, there are people, different time zones or different work things come up, or they've got to go to the dentist or whatever, that they can't make class for whatever reason, and we have it on video.
I want to, just because it keeps popping in my head,
Go ahead.
talking about Milton Erickson stories. I had a lady who drove from Boston to Newport, which isn't too far, but traffic is, and she had a fear of needles, and I won't give away any more about her, of course, but so we had a great session. It was pure talk, and meaning pure Ericksonian. And I basically we just kind of chatted. It was almost like, almost really girlfriend talk. And I knew this was going to take, 2 or 3 sessions. So I just kind of added a few things for her to use, some techniques and tools, which you gave us too. And those are wonderful that they can take and use themselves later. I gave her one to anchor some of the feelings that she wanted to feel. And so she called me and said, on the way home, I got in the most horrific traffic. It was awful. And she happened, and the way I anchor sometimes is thumb and forefinger together. She said, all of a sudden I felt calm. She said, I couldn't believe it. She said, I looked down and there's my thumb and finger together. That's the power of, using these metaphoric examples and stories. And then, of course, we talk all about anchoring too. I know that that's not specifically Ericksonian, but
no, it's not at all. It's totally NLP, but yeah, go ahead.
But it is totally NLP, but that's I'll just say that's the beauty of you, Doug, because you wove in all that knowledge you have of NLP and sleight of mouth, all the different things. And I think that's important. I'd want to know that if I were sitting on the other side of this, how can I add all these things together? How can I add the other things I know, as being a coach or a psychologist or anybody who might use this, a nurse, nurses are now taking classes, just so they can have a better day, and help people more. But that anchor, I think, is important, because when you tell the stories, what Milton Erickson to me did in my reading of him and studying him, is that he did have his way of anchoring in those metaphors.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's what I wanted to get you to talk about.
Yeah, he had his ways of anchoring, but he didn't call it that, and he certainly didn't teach it
he did not,
as they do in NLP. Yeah, no, for sure. It's interesting that your client didn't know she was squeezing your thumb. It just noticed that it.
She just looked down, like thinking, wow, that's really good. I got to write that down. She looked down and she knew that she looked down and her fingers had just, on her lap touched. And it was, I know that the anchors are NLP, but to me, when you use a metaphoric story, it's like learning to stop that stop sign. Did you do that consciously or did you do that subconsciously? Well, so that's an anchor, that's my point. Yeah. She looked down and said, there, my thumb and finger are together. That's how I had anchored it for her.
That's great. That's great. And that is somewhat common in hypnosis to call it a post-hypnotic suggestion that, people do in hypnosis, who say every time you see the color red, you'll remember that you are a non-smoker now because you stopped that old habit. Just like a red stop sign, you realize that you stop. And so, yeah, it becomes an anchor. In fact, I think if I remember hearing Richard Bandler talking about it correctly, I think it actually was something that he stole from hypnosis. The concept of anchoring is in fact from hypnosis, that post-hypnotic suggestions. He said, well, if you can do that, then why can't you do this? And he just made up anchoring like that. So that's with Richard, you're not actually completely sure that the stories are real or not. So
exactly.
I can't can't say definitively that's true, but he did say it at least once. So it sounds true, probably true. I don't know. Hey, there's a question in the chat, so I'm going to talk about it. Somebody asked, do I cover nested loops in the training? Well, do you want to answer that?
He did. Ooh, come on! Don't I get some stars here in nested?
Yeah, you get lots of stars. I don't know how to do them exactly, but yeah, I'll send you some. But yeah, we do. In fact, there's in straight ahead Ericksonian hypnosis. There's like I said before, some people, Erickson taught in story form, so people would listen to his stories and they'd take certain things from it and develop their own ways of doing Ericksonian hypnosis that was right for them. So one couple, Carol and Steve Langton, created what they called the multiple embedded metaphor format that we teach in class. And it's pretty extensive. So it's not quite as easy as just simple nested loops. A nested loop is something where you start a story and then halfway through you just leave it off and then start telling another story. And that reminds me of a third story. And then you tell a third story. And sometimes you come back and close them in reverse order. Sometimes you may do it slightly differently, but yes, we do cover that in class. It can be really useful. It can be a great way of very subtly, going into a deeper trance, because their conscious mind is still thinking about the first story, or at least part of them is still thinking, what happened to Bill and Susie? What happened to them? Are they left on that boat all alone? Are they going to get home? I don't know. But then we've gone to another story where we get really interested in the dog and burying that stick. And then the third story, oh, that's really interesting about your dry cleaning. And then finally, you go back and say, and the dog found the stick, and so we can close the loops after that. But
it gets them into a different state for sure. And then you can weave in some of their own stories, thoughts, situations that they tell you. And that's a great way to do that, and use those, use their words, what they're feeling into those.
Yeah.
And, that is really invaluable too. Good question, because it does take a little bit of practice and a real deep understanding of it. But man, once you get it, you just start talking and they don't realize you're moving on to something else. And I really can't think of the example where, remember in our class, Doug, and we're all saying, what is he doing? Like, you could see all the faces like, what is Erickson saying? And we're all typing, do you understand this? And that was, I believe, the nested loop. He kept talking and talking, and he brought it round. He brought it home.
Yeah.
And I believe that was, your video example of the nested loop. Correct me, please. But that was brilliant, because you can add in a lot of things that don't seem to go together, and then they do.
Exactly. And it's always fun when you link them together, if you choose to, because sometimes one of the things I learned from Richard Bandler is that when he does nested loops, sometimes he purposely does not close one or two of them. He leaves them open because he wants to have the person still have that sense of curiosity and, moving towards discovery of their own, so he leaves it open so they can do that.
One of the other things that you do really well, and I have to say I've developed, is when you just, and it's hard to do as a, in communication, just to leave it open, like to say, and then she was, and say nothing. And it's kind of hard. You gave us the reason for that, because their mind is going to keep going.
Yeah.
And because it's going to fill that in, and it's going to go back to that experience that we're digging at and go after it. And it may not come up right away to them or me, but it will loosen it and help them understand what exactly, they're after. Because we want to go after that,
Yeah. I think also it's analogous to what you're just saying, is that one of the things I emphasize a lot with my students is the ability to pause and to have silence and to let yourself be comfortable being uncomfortable. because it's really important for the client to have time in their own brain to do what Dave Dobson called, cross-referencing, to have the files, cross-filing, to be going through. Cross-filing is what he said. But they won't do that if you keep yammering away. They need some time. And it's funny because I used to do co-training with a guy named John Laval, who's Richard Bandler's right-hand man at this point. Bandler calls him the good John because he had some falling outs with John Grinder. So when John and I used to co-train together, I'd studied with Dobson and done a lot of Ericksonian work. So I was really into like silence and slowing down and letting people find their own, way of making those connections inside their own mind. But John had studied with Bandler mostly. And so they just talked really fast and kept going and going. So every time if we were doing a double induction at the end of class, which we often did, I would pause and John would just like dive right in there and start talking more stuff. So we didn't have that chance. But yeah, fun stuff. Yeah. So so what I was talking about a minute ago is that people need to develop their own style of hypnosis. And I think you did that, and you were referring to that early on, that everyone is individual. Milton Erickson often said everyone is as individual as their own thumbprint. And it's important for us as therapists or as hypnotists, hypnotherapists, to recognize that and appreciate that. But it's also important to know that it's true for us too.
It is.
When I play piano, as you know, but I also sing. I don't make that a public knowledge, but I do. I sing. And, I was thinking about that not too long ago, about how I might not have the best singing voice in the world, but it's mine. I'm as good as Hugh Laurie. He sings in public.
Come
on. But we need to appreciate and recognize that, you are a unique individual, and the way you do hypnosis is unique to you. The way you do anything is unique to you. And to glom onto, to own, to embrace your uniqueness, and use that in the communication with the other individual that you're in community with, it you're in communion with, it you're talking to, you're having a communication, you're in your client, that you get into this field, as Stephen Gilligan talks it, like this field of connection, that you really can get amazing information. I've been in that place where I've suddenly said something to the client that I don't know why I said it, just suddenly popped up, something about a purple balloon or something. I don't know, just pops up. And they tell me later, it's like, how did you know to say that thing about the purple balloon? That was amazing. Have you had that experience?
Oh yeah. And I always have my clipboard. I'm like writing that down, because yes, it does. When you're authentic and you gain those insights, I think. I can't explain it any other way.
Yeah.
No, that's true. It is. I've definitely had that experience many times.
On my podcast recently, I had Stephen Gilligan on as a guest, and he told me a story in answer to a question that I asked him about when he was studying Ericksonian hypnosis, studying Erickson, learning from Erickson early on when he was still in NLP with Bandler and Grinder, like before NLP was NLP, like 1972 or whatever. It was like before it was named NLP, they were just doing these things at Bandler's house. And he said that when he was put into a trance, I think John Grinder did the induction. I'd always heard it was a double induction from Bandler and Grinder, but Stephen said it was just Grinder that did the induction. But they were going to do this deep trance identification, putting him into trance and having him become Erickson. Mm-hmm. And so they said before they started, they ran over next door and got Gregory Bateson, who was Bandler's next door neighbor at that time back in Santa Cruz. And they got Gregory Bateson to come over because he was good friends with Erickson. They were really close friends, personal friends. which is how Bandler met Erickson in the first place, is through Gregory Bateson's influence. So they brought Gregory Bateson over, and they induced Stephen into trance, and they had him become Erickson, and he was, sitting in his sort of quasi wheelchair, as it were, and becoming Erickson. And he was so into Erickson, he looked at Gregory, and he started talking to Gregory as Erickson, and started saying things to Gregory that only those two knew. Ooh. That Erickson and Gregory had private conversations that Stephen had nothing to know about, knew nothing about at all.
Oh, that's a great.
But started saying these things as Erickson to Gregory Bateson, and Bateson was freaked out. He just ran. According to Steve, he ran from the room, ran from the house, ran back home because it was freaking him out. So yeah, it's very, very interesting to get into that sort of hypno state where we have perhaps a greater connection to the collective unconscious than we have in other waking states.
Well, there's so much neuroscience coming out now, the past few years, that we're finding, the things that we kind of experienced, we could say, yes, I feel that way. But now we know that that everything we've ever seen or heard is recorded. It just takes a cue or a trigger to retrieve it.
Cool. Hey, listen, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to say thank you for being here, Nona. I'm going to let you go from here. I'm going to just do a little commercial because people, somebody thank you, Matt. I think it is. Yeah, my eyes quite can't see that, but Matt asked, where can I learn hypnosis? And thank you for asking that question, because I'm going to answer that right now. But thank you, Nona. It was really great to have you here.
What a pleasure, Doug.
Good to see you. Stick around. Be in touch. Okay, so thank God she's gone. Just kidding. It's a joke. It's a joke. It's just a joke. She's actually in the off stage, so she heard me say that. It was a joke. So yeah, we are doing a class. We're doing 3 classes. Tuesdays, sleight of mouth. Wednesdays, NLP. Thursdays, Neo-Ericksonian Hypnosis, from April for the next 4 months. So it's every week from 1 o'clock until 2 o'clock or 2:30 Eastern for 4 months. And in that period of time, we do a lot of learning. And when I say we, of course, I mean you. I do too, but I'm learning different things perhaps than you are. But we all are learning, and we're all sharing, and it's a great way to learn these things. Clearly, skills like sleight of mouth, you need repetition. And that's where that comes from. As I mentioned in the sleight of mouth section on Tuesday, everything I teach in sleight of mouth could be done in 2 hours of just data dump. But it's not the way to learn a skill. You've got to practice. You've got to practice. NLP is kind of the same way. There's lots and lots of information. We've honed it down to some of the essentials, but it still requires practice. It's a communication skill. It's not just about what you say. It's about what you're hearing the other person say and how to respond to that in real time. So again, it's a communication skill. You need other people. That's why we do it with classes and breakout rooms and practicing with humans, so you can learn it not just from a book or from a tape. You have to practice with people. We also encourage people, and they do, create their own cohorts outside of our main cohort. They practice little practice sessions that they do on their own, different places at times. And then finally, of course, on Thursdays, we do this Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis training. And I call it Neo-Ericksonian because it's built on what I learned from people that taught me Ericksonian hypnosis, but also Banner and Grinder's version of Ericksonian meta model stuff, Milton model stuff, and all the different people that I've learned with. So we try to make it easy as possible, but no easier. We try to make it as simple as possible, but no simpler. We try to make it so you have plenty of time to practice, to get it into your fingers, get it into your bones, and we invite you to join us this cohort. We'll be doing this again in 6 months, but who knows after that? It's a year-long cohort. You can take as many courses as we teach throughout that year. You can take them over and over again, and I invite you to be part of that. So here's how. I'm going to put this into the thing here. So you can use that link right there, essentialcoachingskills.com, Essential Coaching Skills membership, or you can just go to essentialcoachingskills.com and click the link that's there to go to the sales page for that, or you can scan that QR code. So however it is you want to do that, that's the way you do that. And we'd love to have you join us. People who join before midnight next Friday, I think it's next Friday, pretty soon, you can find out online, get some extra bonuses. You get a copy of a seminar I taught back live many years ago, well, 10 years ago, called The Language of Change. That is a wonderful thing. It's kind of, it itself is talking about blending these three things, but primarily blending Ericksonian hypnosis with sleight of mouth. That's what the language of change is about. And then, of course, there's also the bonus of you can get one free session with me, an hour of alone time that you can use for whatever sort of thing you want. You can ask questions. You can ask, be specific about, things you aren't understanding, or you can do a session of NLP or hypnosis, whatever you want. It's up to you, but you get an hour free time. So that's it. And thank you for being here. This is the end of the stream. I apologize once again to anybody who was trying to do this on Facebook, because obviously it didn't work. But those of you who are on YouTube, thanks for saying hi in the chat. And hope to see you in class. Thanks a lot. Going to end the stream here. I got to push a couple buttons to make that happen. So thanks again.